Nobody expected that when the paramedic pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, he would go completely still, then lock eyes with his partner and say, "We need to move now." But that Thanksgiving evening, when my chest locked up and my vision started shrinking at the edges, when my mother-in-law told me to stop making everything about myself, when my husband just stood there and said nothing, everything I had quietly accepted for 6 years finally came undone. I am Claire, 31 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being told that I am too sensitive for my own good, not by strangers, by the people who were supposed to love me most. My husband's name is Daniel. We met in college, married at 26, and moved to his hometown of Millbrook, Tennessee 2 years later when his father got sick and his family needed him close. I followed because that is what I did. I was good at following, at adjusting, at making myself smaller so that everyone else could feel more comfortable. I had been practicing that particular skill since childhood. Daniel's mother, Margaret, is the kind of woman who delivers every criticism with a smile so pleasant you almost miss the blade underneath. She has never raised her voice at me. She has never needed to. Instead, she asks questions. "Are you sure you want a second helping, Claire?" Or, "Isn't it interesting how some women can handle stress without getting sick?" Or my personal favorite, delivered at Daniel's sister's baby shower 2 years ago when I had excused myself 3 times because my head was pounding. "You know, Claire, some people use physical complaints as a way to avoid social situations they find uncomfortable. I read an article about it." Daniel grew up watching his mother operate this way, so to him it was simply how women talked. He never saw the small destructions she left behind because he had been standing in the rubble so long he thought it was just the floor. His sister, Renee, was the golden one. She had married a local man, produced 2 children on schedule, and never complained about anything louder than a polite sigh. She was the measuring stick against which I was perpetually and silently failing. The only person in that family who had ever treated me like a full human being was Daniel's father, Gene. He was quiet and steady, the kind of man who listened when you spoke and remembered what you said. He passed away 8 months before that Thanksgiving, and I missed him in a way I had not fully admitted to myself. The warning sign started 4 days before the holiday. I woke up on a Sunday feeling like I had not slept at all, even though Daniel said I had gone down at 10 and barely moved. My left arm felt heavy in a way that was hard to describe. Not painful exactly, more like it belonged to someone else. I noticed it when I was reaching for my coffee mug and had to use both hands. I told myself it was stress. We had been under a lot of it. Daniel had been passed over for a promotion at work and had been quiet and withdrawn for weeks. I was picking up freelance copywriting jobs to help with the mortgage, working late most nights after my regular hours at the marketing agency. And now Thanksgiving was coming, which meant 4 days at Margaret's house, sleeping in the guest room that smelled like cedar and judgment. By Tuesday, the heaviness in my arm had not gone away. It came and went, sometimes barely noticeable, sometimes strong enough that I dropped things. I dropped a pen at work and my colleague Sarah looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. "Just clumsy," I said. I had said that so many times in my life it came out without thought. That evening I mentioned it to Daniel while we were packing. "My arm keeps feeling weird," I said. "Like heavy or tingly." He did not look up from the suitcase. "You're probably just tense about going to Mom's." "Maybe," I said. And I let it go. Because I had been taught to let things go. Wednesday morning we drove the 40 minutes to Millbrook. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands in my lap watching the highway signs pass, trying to name what I was feeling. There was the arm thing. There was also a slight pressure behind my left eye that I kept blinking against, and twice on the drive I felt a wave of dizziness so brief I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Margaret met us at the door with a hug for Daniel and a smile for me. Renee and her husband Troy were already there with the kids. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasting meat and something underneath it that I could never quite identify, something close and airless, the smell of a place that had never let anything out. "You look tired, Claire," Margaret said, taking my coat. It was not a question. "Long week at work," I said. She handed my coat to Daniel without looking at me again. That first evening was fine in the way that fine is sometimes the most exhausting thing to be. I helped Renee fold napkins into the shape she had found on Pinterest. I answered Margaret's questions about my job with just enough detail to seem engaged and not enough to invite follow-up. I ate dinner and said it was delicious, and it was. And I hated that it was because it made everything harder to hold on to. When we went to bed that night, I lay in the dark and pressed my right hand over my left arm. The heaviness was still there, a dull and uninvited presence. I thought about calling my doctor in the morning. I thought about how Daniel would look at me if I said I wanted to leave early. I thought about the article Margaret had mentioned at the baby shower. I did not call my doctor. Thanksgiving morning began at 7. Margaret ran her holiday kitchen like a military operation, and everyone had a role. Mine was to handle the appetizers and keep the children entertained while Renee helped with the main dishes. I did not mind the children. Renee's kids were 6 and 4, loud and easy to love, and chasing them around the backyard gave me something to do with my body besides notice what it was telling me. By 10 in the morning, the pressure behind my eye had become something closer to a headache. Not the worst I had ever had, but persistent, sitting just behind my left temple and refusing to move. I took 2 ibuprofen with a glass of water and got back to arranging the cheese board. "You're not going to make that look pretty no matter how long you fuss with it," Margaret said from behind me. She was smiling when I turned around. She was always smiling. "Just trying to get it right," I said. "Renee always does this part," she said and picked up a stack of crackers to rearrange what I had already arranged. I stepped back and let her. Around noon, something shifted. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing celery when the dizziness came back. Longer this time, maybe 4 or 5 seconds, the kind that makes you grip the edge of whatever is closest to you. I gripped the sink. It passed. I looked at the window above the faucet and took a slow breath. "You all right?" It was Daniel, passing through on his way to the back porch. "Dizzy for a second, I'm fine." He looked at me for a moment. "Did you eat breakfast?" "Yes." "Okay." He kept moving. I kept rinsing celery. The family gathered at 2 for the meal. Margaret at the head of the table, Renee and Troy across from Daniel and me, the kids in their booster seats at the end. Jean's chair had a small arrangement of dried flowers on it. No one mentioned it. No one mentioned him at all, and I understood that grief in this family was handled the same way everything else was, by pretending it had already been resolved. I made it through most of the meal. I ate small amounts of things, nodding when people spoke to me, offering the expected sounds of appreciation for the food. The headache had not worsened, but it had not left either. My left arm had gone from heavy to something else, a faint buzzing sensation that ran from my shoulder to my elbow. I kept that arm in my lap under the table. Dessert came out and conversation turned to the holiday sales and whether anyone was doing any shopping in the morning. I was calculating how many hours until we could politely leave, when I noticed that the words Margaret was saying were not quite landing the way they should. Like there was a half-second delay between her mouth moving and me understanding what she meant. I blinked and shook my head slightly. "Claire, are you even listening?" Renee asked, not unkindly. "Sorry." "Yes, the outlets at the mall." Renee frowned. "I said we were thinking about the outlet stores. Are you okay? You look pale." "Headache," I said. Margaret set down her fork with a small, precise click. "You know, I have noticed that Claire tends to have some kind of physical complaint at family gatherings. This is the 3rd time I can think of off the top of my head." The table went quiet in the specific way that Daniel's family went quiet when Margaret said something that everyone recognized but no one challenged. "I have a headache," I said again, and even to my own ears. My voice sounded strange, slightly thick, like I was speaking with my mouth too full. "I'm just saying, there might be something worth exploring there," Margaret said pleasantly. "Stress, anxiety. There's no shame in it." "She said she has a headache, Mom," Daniel said, and I felt a small flicker of gratitude, but it was the kind of gratitude that made me sad because the bar was so low. I pushed back from the table and said I was going to get some air. Nobody stopped me. I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me, and I held onto the porch railing with both hands. The night air was sharp and clean, and I breathed it in deliberately, the way you do when you are trying to convince yourself that everything is manageable. The headache was worse now. A deep throbbing on the left side that matched my pulse. The buzzing in my arm had moved, or spread, or changed into something harder to name. The fingers on my left hand felt strange. Not numb, exactly. Wrong. I looked at my left hand wrapped around the railing. I tried to squeeze harder, and the signal from my brain to my fingers seemed to travel through something thick and uncooperative. Something is wrong. The thought arrived clean and certain, without the usual layer of self-doubt underneath it. Something is wrong with me right now. I let go of the railing and turned to go back inside. The back door opened before I reached it. Daniel's cousin Michelle, who had arrived late and whose presence I had been quietly glad for all evening, stepped out to join me. She was a respiratory therapist at a hospital in Nashville, someone I had always liked for the directness that the rest of the family seemed to find exhausting. "Hey," she said, "you look terrible, Claire, and I mean that clinically." "My head," I said, and then I could not quite finish the sentence the way I meant to. I had wanted to say, "My head is killing me," but what came out was, "My head is," and then the wrong word, something that did not belong there. Michelle's expression changed immediately. "What did you just say?" I tried again. The words were there, but the path between thinking them and saying them had gone strange. I still remember the casual shrug. As she handed me 200, the casual shrug was calm and measured, the voice of someone who had shifted into a different gear. I smiled, or I tried to, and I watched her eyes track across my face. "I'm calling 911, she said. "It's probably Claire." She put her hand on my arm and looked at me with a steadiness that I had not been shown all day. "I need you to let me do this right now." I nodded. The back door opened again and Daniel appeared. Behind him I could see the soft light of the dining room and Margaret's profile as she looked toward us. "What's going on?" Daniel asked. "I think Claire may be having a TIA, Michelle said, already with her phone to her ear. "Possible stroke symptoms. I'm calling an ambulance." "She has a headache," Daniel said. Michelle was already talking to the dispatcher. "She just needs to lie down," Daniel said. Less certainly this time. What followed is a series of images rather than a continuous memory. Margaret appearing in the doorway and saying, "Is this really necessary?" Michelle saying yes with a brevity that allowed no argument. Daniel's face moving from confusion to something closer to fear as Michelle described my symptoms to the dispatcher. My own hands, both of them, held in front of me in the porch light as I tried to make all my fingers move the same way at the same time. Renee came outside at some point. She stood next to Daniel with her arms crossed against the cold, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Something open and unsure, like a door she did not know how to close. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. The paramedics were efficient and unhurried in the way that competent people are unhurried even when something is urgent. One of them knelt in front of me and went through a rapid assessment. He asked me to follow his finger with my eyes. He asked me to repeat a sentence back to him. He asked me to squeeze both of his hands as hard as I could. He did not say anything to me when I could not squeeze with equal strength on both sides. He said something to his partner instead, quietly, and his partner went for equipment. "We're going to take you in," he told me. "Okay?" "Okay," I said, and the word came out right that time. As they were loading me onto the stretcher, I heard Margaret say to Daniel, "She was fine at dinner. She was eating fine." And Daniel said, quietly but not quietly enough, "I know. I don't know what's happening." And I thought, I tried to tell you something was wrong. I tried to tell you 4 days ago. Michelle rode with me in the ambulance. She held my hand and talked to me in a calm, continuous way, partly to keep me focused and partly, I think, because she understood that I needed to hear a voice that believed me. She told me what to expect. She told me the hospital was 12 minutes away. She told me the fact that I was still talking was a good sign. "Am I going to be okay?" I asked. "I think you caught this early," she said, which was not exactly an answer, but it was honest. At the hospital, things moved quickly in a way that confirmed everything Michelle had been too careful to say directly. A neurologist appeared within 20 minutes. There was an MRI, urgent and claustrophobic. There were blood tests and questions and a team of people who spoke to each other in the efficient shorthand of people with something serious to address. The neurologist, a woman named Dr. Okafor, came to find me afterward and sat beside my bed in the way that doctors sit when they have something real to say and are planning to say it plainly. You had what we call a TIA, she told me. A transient ischemic attack. A brief interruption of blood flow to part of your brain. She explained the mechanism, the risk factors, the treatment protocol. She did not soften anything. She used real words and waited to see if I had questions and took my questions seriously when I had them. If you had waited much longer to come in, she said, we would be having a different conversation. I asked her what a different conversation would have looked like. A TIA is often a warning, she said. What comes after a warning if nothing is done can be a great deal worse. She said it gently, but she said it. Daniel arrived at the hospital while I was still in the initial assessment room. He came in fast and sat down beside me and took my right hand, and I could see in his face that whatever the paramedics had said to him had rearranged something. He was not confused anymore. He was scared in a way that was simpler and cleaner than confusion. Claire, he said. I didn't. He stopped. I know, I said. No. He shook his head. I need to say it. I knew something was off with you for days and I told you it was stress and I let my mom say what she said at dinner and I just sat there. I looked at him for a moment. You did, I said. He did not argue with that. Margaret arrived an hour later with Renee. They came into my room together and stood near the door in a way that reminded me of people who have not decided yet whether they are staying or leaving. How are you feeling? Renee asked. Scared, I said. And tired. Margaret said, the doctor mentioned stress can be a contributing factor. The room was quiet. Mom, Daniel said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, Daniel said. I need you to stop. Margaret looked at him with an expression I had never seen cross her face before. Surprise, mostly. The particular surprise of someone who has operated a certain way for a very long time and has just met an unexpected resistance. She did not apologize. Not that night. But she did stop talking, and in that family, I understood that was its own kind of language. Dr. Okafor requested a family meeting the following morning before my discharge. She asked to speak with my husband and anyone else who would be involved in my immediate care. Daniel, Michelle, and Renee were there. Margaret sat in the hallway. Dr. Okafor was precise and unhurried. She explained that TIAs required significant lifestyle adjustments and close follow-up. She explained that stress, specifically chronic and unmanaged stress, was a meaningful risk factor. She explained that symptoms that had been present for several days before the acute episode represented warning signs that should have prompted earlier evaluation. Symptoms like the ones Claire described to her husband were worth taking seriously, she said, looking at Daniel. Arm weakness, dizziness, headache. These are not dramatic presentations. They are clinical descriptions of something your body is trying to communicate. Daniel nodded. He had been nodding since he sat down, the way people nod when they are absorbing something they cannot yet fully hold. I want to be direct, Dr. Okafor said. I am not in the room to assign blame. I am in the room because the environment around a patient affects their recovery. If someone is consistently made to feel that their symptoms are exaggerated, they will wait longer to seek care. Waiting longer, in cases like this, can be the deciding variable. The room was quiet again. Michelle said, I should have pushed her earlier. I saw her on the porch before it became acute and I could have moved faster. You moved fast enough, Dr. Okafor said. That matters. After the doctor left, Daniel looked at the window for a long moment. Then he said, I'm sorry, Claire. I don't mean I'm sorry like something happened to you. I mean I'm sorry because I made it easier for it to happen by not listening. There is a difference, and I had been waiting long enough that I could hear it. I spent one more night in the hospital. Michelle stayed in the chair by my bed until well past midnight and we really talked, in the way that tends to happen in hospitals when the ordinary pretenses have been set aside by circumstance. She told me that she had watched me navigate Daniel's family for 6 years and had always wanted to say something and had never known how. I didn't think it was my place, she said. It would have helped, I told her. I know. I'm sorry. An apology offered without being asked for, offered because it was simply true. I had not realized until that moment how rarely I had been given one of those. Recovery did not happen in a straight line. The weeks after the hospital were marked by medication adjustments, follow-up appointments, and the particular fatigue of a body recalibrating. My employer was understanding. My own family, my parents, and my younger brother came from out of state to spend a week with me, and having them in the house was like opening a window. My mother cried when I told her the full story. Not the medical part, but the rest. "Why didn't you call us?" she kept asking. And I said, honestly, that I had been so well trained to minimize my own experience that calling someone to say I might be sick had not felt like something I was allowed to do. My relationship with Daniel changed. Not all at once and not easily. He started attending therapy, which surprised me. He asked me once in the car on the way home from one of my follow-up appointments, "How long have I been doing this, dismissing you when you said something was wrong?" "A while," I said, "since the beginning." "Not the very beginning." He looked at the road. "When did it change?" I thought about it. "When we moved to Millbrook. When I was in your family's orbit all the time instead of just sometimes." He nodded slowly, and I watched him absorb that. The way a person absorbs a thing they already suspected but needed to hear said plainly before they could work with it. We did not return to Millbrook for Christmas that year. I was not ready, and Daniel, to his credit, did not push it. We spent the holiday at my parents' house, and it was louder and more chaotic than Margaret's gatherings and entirely without the particular tension that I had come to associate with holidays. I ate second helpings. I complained when I was tired. No one found it remarkable. Margaret called in January. The conversation was brief and careful, the kind of conversation that happens between two people who have a great deal of unresolved space between them and are testing the dimensions of it. She did not apologize directly. What she said was, "I realize I have not always made you feel welcome, and I would like to do better." It was half of what it needed to be, but it was more than I had expected. I said, "I appreciate that. I'd like that too." Renee and I started texting separately from the family group chain. Small things at first, a photo of something funny, a question about a recipe. Then, bigger things. She told me once, unprompted, that she had spent years performing health and contentment in her mother's house because it was easier than explaining why she wasn't fine. "I thought you were dramatic," she said. And then I realized I was just more practiced at hiding. I told her I did not hold it against her. "You should, a little," she said. I should have been louder. One Saturday in late February, I was at the farmer's market near our apartment when I saw a woman sitting on a bench outside the entrance with her hands in her lap, looking slightly removed from the scene around her. There was something in her face that I recognized, the particular blankness of someone managing something they do not know how to name. I almost walked past her. Then I stopped. "Excuse me," I said. "I don't want to intrude. But are you feeling okay?" She looked up. She was younger than me, maybe mid-20s. "I've just had this headache for 2 days," she said. "And my arm keeps feeling weird." I sat down next to her. I did not tell her she was probably just stressed. I did not suggest she might be looking for attention or avoiding something difficult. I told her what Michelle had told me on a cold porch on a November night, that her body was trying to tell her something and her job right now was to listen to it. "Can someone drive you to urgent care?" I asked. She hesitated in exactly the way I had hesitated. "I don't want to make a big deal out of nothing." "It might be nothing," I said. "But you know that it doesn't feel like nothing, and that matters," she went. She texted me from the waiting room an hour later because I had given her my number. And later that afternoon she texted again to say that her blood pressure had been dangerously high, that they were keeping her for observation, that she was glad she had gone in. I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time after that message. I had spent 6 years in a family that had trained me to hear my own body the way you hear a car alarm on a street you don't live on, a sound that belongs to someone else's emergency. The TIA had not cured anything. It had not fixed Daniel overnight or transformed Margaret into someone new or resolved the years of accumulated small damages. But it had done one thing with absolute clarity. It had made it impossible for me to keep pretending that my experience of my own body was less reliable than the opinions of the people around me. I knew things now that I had not let myself know before. I knew that fatigue with no explanation is information. I knew that pain does not require permission to be real. I knew that saying something is wrong is not a performance, it is data. And data is not negotiable, not with a husband, not with a mother-in-law, not with anyone. And I knew that the next time my body spoke to me in the voice it had used on that Thanksgiving porch, I would answer it. Loudly, immediately, and without apology. If there is a version of you that has been waiting, that has been sitting on something your body has been saying and wondering whether you are allowed to take it seriously, I want you to hear this. You are. You always were. The people who told you otherwise were wrong, and their being wrong about you has never once changed the truth of what you were feeling. Trust yourself. Please. I nearly had to die to learn how, and I would rather you didn't have to.